The property market myth. When people invest, the greatest myth I've ever heard is 10 years, your property doubles. Now, that's not the case. And I want to really talk about when this doubling occurs, how often it usually occurs, and the mix of results you can get. So firstly, over different time periods, you'll see different growth rates. For example, over the last 20 to 25 years, you might see markets moving upwards of 7% or 6.5% per annum. And then if you stretch it out to 30 years, you might see 5% to 5.5% as the norm for market growth per annum, right? So when you think of that, every time you stretch or bring in this timeline, it changes. And then when you add in a different city, it changes, a different suburb, it changes. So do not assume that just buying your property in 10 years, it doubles. But the funny thing is, people believe that that long-term hold is the only reason it's doubling. Yes, that's the case for those who aren't very in line or in tune with data and what's occurring around different markets. Now, can people predict properties where they're showing signals of capital growth quite accurately? The answer is yes. Can people predict by how much? The answer is no. Percentages, gaps, forecasts, they help. Sometimes within the range, sometimes without the range, because they're forecasts. And that's the inaccurate part, or parts where you don't have a clear number. But the prediction of when things are occurring is very much possible based on certain indicators. Just the how much is usually the most difficult part. Now, when you're thinking of these indicators, what I've commonly seen is that over a 10-year period, you'd be surprised that the booms aren't happening over the 10 years and every year you're getting 5 to 7%, and then all of a sudden you, double your property in 10 years. No, what's usually happening is over a 10-year period, 2 to 4 years represent the boom, right? So with 2 to 4 years representing the boom, timing the market is quite important, as is time in the market. Now, the time in the market will always outpace the time in the market, because if you didn't have the boom in 8, it may come in 10, may come in 12, may come in 15, and that time in the market can always hold it until it happens. And you can be one of those people that goes, see, I told you so, even though you're saying it every year, it would boom, eventually you'll be right. So that's where that time in the market is very much the simple way out to explain property doubling and so forth. But timing the market is still very important, and why it needs to be considered is because of those 2 to 4 year intervals or windows. Now, I did say before, accurately predicting areas that are showing signals of growth or may grow is possible, but the forecast of those percentages, not so much. Are you forecasting a boom period where 2 to 4 years of that cycle, you're either in it just before it starts or on the tail end? Or are you forecasting some improvements, and maybe that's one of those gradual improvements at a good pace that happen in maybe year 5, 6, 7, or the other way around, being year 1 to 4, but at least for 2 to 3 years as well. And then on the other times of it, there's also going to be periods of 2 to 3 years of, say, flat or declining markets. This can be perfectly seen in just the last, say, 2 decades in Sydney. You have the recent 5 years, 6 years going from 2014 to 2020. We've seen huge declines and recoveries and growth all during that time, right? So growth periods 14 to 17, decline 17 to 19, recovery 19 to 20. So you see this whole 10-year double and everything. It could happen over the long average, but it's not happening it's just doubling. This is how much it grows each year, and I performed well because it went by this much this year, or I didn't perform well because my asset didn't grow much this year. So this is where, if you keep ranking your performance by the per annum percentage, you're going to be hurt, because property doesn't move in this consistent line of per annum 5 to 7%. There are going to be 10-year periods where, yes, property prices can double, but booms don't last for the long time, 2 to 4 years. Declines don't last a long time unless there's certain singular driven markets by single economies or certain heavy industries. And then from that aspect, that's where this myth needs to really be busted. Do not think of that myth with the 10-year double, that everywhere it happens, and do not think that it happens annually and it equals that much. Booms don't last for a long time, recoveries happen, flatline periods happen, and this is where the second part of the Sydney market, where if we look at it from now 2002 to 2014, you had almost 8 to 10 years of flat market or slight growth. And then you had 2 years of some heavy rises and another 2 years of some heavy rises as well. So this is where that real analysis needs to come into play, that yes, time in the market will always win. It always will, because you can keep saying it's going to boom until it does, and it does, and you're right. You'll never be wrong because you're holding. But timing the market has some validity to it, because buying in the downsides, buying in those recovery periods, buying in the flat period, buying when there's slight growth or heavy growth can all make a big difference to how you have that first start of the journey. Or the most important word of investing is opportunity cost. You could have been the time in the market person, stayed there for the 8 years it's flat and kept saying it's eventually going to boom. It's Sydney, it's Melbourne, it's going to be fine, it's Brisbane, it'll be fine. Big markets do big things, it's all good. And the whole 8 to 10 years you've been waiting and sitting there waiting for that growth time and being time in the market, you've missed out on windows of timing the market on other markets. That's opportunity cost. Because whilst overall your growth may happen, someone else has had a bit of growth, taken equity, gone again, another market a bit of growth, diversified their portfolio, another market a bit of growth, and so by doing that, the end result is substantial. They've been a part of multiple property rises rather than just sitting there hoping for time in the market only, because 10 years property prices double, so forth. So time in, timing, both very important. Time in always wins if you just want to talk it at a singular asset level, but without timing from a portfolio level, opportunity cost is going to sting you, and that too hard. And also, do not assume the 10-year growth doubling happens everywhere and happens at an average growth rate. You can still have a wonderful, successful journey with 2 years of decline amongst the 10. It's just the resiliency of investors that will see it for the long term. It's the savviness of investors, the use of a team, the professionals around them, or heavy research that will get them in the timing or the better periods than somewhat not so good periods. And that part of your investing journey will really take you to the next level.